Hope you've noticed colour as we celebrate. Have you had a good few days? It's been great where we are. We've got people on the green outside where we are. We had different people coming and going. We even had the mayor turn up and plant a tree. It's been really good to celebrate and then to watch on TV the different events there were. And the service which was really moving on Friday, and then the concert last night, some of you I'm sure enjoyed, as we celebrate the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. And even if you are a Republican and not a royalist, I'm sure that you can enjoy or recognise the achievements of the Queen over these last 70 years, which has been quite extraordinary. So today we want to remember not just the person, Queen Elizabeth, but also how she served and how she's lived her life. And the reading we've chosen from Philippians, from the Apostle Paul, where he points to Jesus' life and his calling to be a servant of others, to be the example for us to follow. And so we're going to use this passage to learn from Jesus' life and how we see elements of that coming through in the life of the Queen, and how we are called, therefore, to serve as well. So I've entitled this talk, Rise Up and Serve. Rise Up and Serve. And the first thing we really see about the Queen, and I've really seen this really come through strongly over these last few days, is that her life and foundation is rooted in her wanting to be, and is rooted in faith. She's rooted in faith. As Anne said, she became Queen on the 6th of February 1952. But the preparations then began for her coronation over a year later in June 53. And to help her prepare for that coronation, the then Archbishop of Canterbury, Geoffrey Fisher, put together what was called a little book called the Private Devotions, her private devotions. And what they were short daily meditations over 33 days, which began on the 1st of May and went through for the next 30-odd days. And that booklet, although it has been quite obscure and not in the public eye, has been used to bring together something called Our Faithful Queen, 70 years of faith and service. And as you go, if you would like to, we're going to give you this as a gift. And it's based very much on the dedication, these private dedications and thoughts that the Queen used over these 33 days. So do take one as you go if you would like to read that. And what I really enjoyed hearing from Shirley and read from Ian and Janet Clark was people who were there, which really bringing alive the story of what you went through, not realising that Portsmouth, having no TV, what you had to go through to get television in those days. And someone said before the service, no, I wasn't alive at the coronation, thankfully, someone said of that age. But the coronation, 3 hours of length of watching that. And so also Shirley said, everybody stood when the Queen was crowned. So if you've missed that, please just watch this moment when she is crowned. You could just hear God Save the Queen, and probably reverberated through the houses and through the towns around the country. And that celebration, that coronation, had huge significance in all the different elements of it over those 3 hours. There were the oaths, there was the giving of the Bible, there was a communion service within it, there was anointing and blessing and royal robes and symbols of office that were given. And the words from that coronation is where the Queen has looked in 2 different directions throughout her life. That of upwards towards God and that of serving her people. And within that service, the symbolism is really strong. So, for instance, there is a symbolism of power that comes through. But it's an interesting slant because the Queen is given an orb. And that orb has on top, in it thousands or hundreds of precious jewels, but on top there is a cross, which symbolizes the rule of Jesus Christ over the earth. She also holds a scepter within which are many, many diamonds, and one of those diamonds is worth over 400 million. And during the service, as Ant said in the questions earlier, the Queen is presented with an object, and the words are then said, "This is given to you, the most valuable thing that this world affords." And she's given the Bible. Now, in the reading we had from the Apostle Paul, he starts out writing and saying this. He says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit." Now, it seems strange that in that service surrounded with pomp and power and riches, how much those words needed to be heard. And I think, as we've seen throughout that 70 years of the Queen's reign, the question is often asked, what is it that is the secret to the consistency of the Queen's character? What is it that has made or helped her to bring that extraordinary commitment and service to the nation and to the global community? Well, that question was answered by herself, the Queen, in one of her Christmas broadcasts in 2002. And this is what she said. She said, "I know just how much I rely on my faith to guide me through the good times and the bad. Each day is a new beginning. I know that the only way to live my life is to try to do what is right, to take the long view, to give of my best in all that the day brings, and to put my trust in God. I draw strength from the message of hope in the Christian gospel." The Queen's life is rooted in Jesus Christ, the message of hope in the gospel. And we see it again and again and again. It comes through particularly in those Christmas broadcasts where she herself writes what she says. And she has identified really strongly with being a follower of Christ and being his servant. And again, these words from 2016, she said, "Jesus Christ lived obscurely for most of his life and never travelled far. He was maligned and rejected by many, though he had done no wrong. And yet billions of people now follow his teaching and find in him the guiding light for their lives. I am one of them, because Christ's example helps me see the value of doing small things with great love. Whoever does them and whatever they themselves believe." Now, there's much that we don't know about the Queen. Throughout her life, she's met many leaders from across the world, and I'm sure that she holds strongly held beliefs and well-considered opinions. But many of those opinions, we don't know what they are. But curiously, this is not the case for her faith in Jesus Christ. About Jesus, she is remarkably open about what she believes. And as I said, this mostly comes through in her annual Christmas broadcasts. And in that, she has spoken of Jesus Christ being her inspiration, her role model, her anchor. She speaks often about her faith in Jesus. So as we look at the Queen and what roots her in her life, let me ask you a personal question. In your workplace, in your family, in your community, with your friends, do you speak openly about your faith? What is your root in life? Is your life rooted in your faith in Jesus? Second thing I want to learn from the Queen and her life is this: of valuing others over self. Of valuing others over self. Paul puts it really well. These words are quite well known. You may well have heard them before, where the Apostle Paul writes, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interest of the others. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant." And I think you would agree with me, the Queen has worked and does still work at 96 incredibly hard. She has all those red box papers that come her way from the government. She has her regular meetings with the prime ministers, hundreds of pieces of correspondence, state visits, and talking with many people and celebrating the good works that are done. And all of that flows out of her commitment to Christ. And this is her speaking herself, how she put this in one of her broadcasts.
This is the time of year when we remember that God sent his only Son to serve, not to be served. He restored love and service to the centre of our lives in the person of Jesus Christ. It is my prayer this Christmas Day that his example and teaching will continue to bring people together to give the best of themselves in the service of others.
Now we know that the Queen didn't choose her role, she inherited it. But she has chosen to do her work in a generous-hearted and servant-hearted way. She's followed in the way of Christ. And often that is, yes, of giving your time, but often she's gone over and above. And I read this story from the chief rabbi, former chief rabbi, Jonathan Sachs. On one moving occasion, he talks of the Queen visiting a group of Auschwitz survivors. Now, the Queen always arrives on time and leaves on time. It's called the politeness of kings. But on one memorable occasion, on the 27th of January 2005, it was the 60th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz at St. James's Palace. The Queen was meeting these Auschwitz survivors. But when the time came for her to leave, she stayed and stayed and stayed. One of her attendants said she never lingers and stays this long. But she gave each of the survivors her focused and undivided attention as she listened to each of their stories, and there was a lot of people gathered in that room. And Jonathan Sachs, who wrote this, he said, "It was an act of kindness that almost brought me to tears. It brought a kind of blessed closure into deeply lacerated lives." As Paul writes, "In humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of the others." So another question for our own reflections: how is your servant heart at valuing others over and above yourselves? And the third thing I want to pull out from the Queen's life is that of a sacrificial calling. A sacrificial calling. And again, it's emulating the ultimate calling we see in Jesus Christ, as the Apostle Paul puts it this way. He says, "And being found in appearance as a man, Jesus humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross." Now, during that coronation service we alluded to earlier and saw earlier, part of that service is the part of the service that many people just don't know about, because that part of the service was not televised. It was considered to be too sacred to show. And it's the part of the ceremony where the Queen is anointed. All the symbols of state and pomp are removed until she's just left with a white dress, and then goes under this canopy, this tent, within which the anointing takes place. And the Queen has her oil anointed in her hand, on her chest, and on her head. And she is anointed to be set apart, to serve and love her people in all her actions, with her heart, and in her mind. And in that commitment, she is following in the example of Christ. Christ means anointed, set apart not to be served, but to serve. To sacrifice his life that we might have life forever. And again, these are her speaking in her own words, how she seeks to live her life.
I hope that, like me, you will be comforted by the example of Jesus of Nazareth, who often in circumstances of great adversity managed to live an outgoing, unselfish and sacrificial life. Countless millions of people around the world continue to celebrate his birthday at Christmas, inspired by his teaching. He makes it clear that genuine human happiness and satisfaction lie more in giving than receiving, more in serving than in being served. We can surely be grateful that 2,000 years after the birth of Jesus, so many of us are able to draw inspiration from his life and message, and to find in him a source of strength and courage.
So as followers of Jesus, you and I and the Queen are called to have a sacrificial calling, to lay down our lives for others. And a fourth thing that I see in the Queen is someone who has strength through adversity. Throughout her reign, there have been ups and downs over the 70 years, as in any person's life. And there is that real need for a sense of humour, as I think Prince Charles alluded to last night when he talked about the Queen and Mummy. I read about the Royal Variety performance in 1964. And the Queen is presented with all those who are going to be going on stage later. They're presented to the Queen. And as they're standing in line, there she comes across a fez-wearing comedian called Tommy Cooper. Tommy Cooper, as the Queen comes to him, says, "Do you mind, Mum, if I ask you a personal question?" She said, "No, although I might not give you a full answer." So what he says to her, "Mum, do you like football?" She said, "Well, no, not really," the Queen replies. But says, "In that case, do you mind if I have your cup final tickets?" So that was great. There is a time to laugh, but there's also a time to weep. During her 70-year reign, the Queen has known her own burden of sorrow, bereavement, failings, and betrayal. On the 40th anniversary of her accession to the throne in 1992, it's described the year as the Annus Horribilis, you know your Latin. 4 days before this speech, Windsor Castle was badly damaged by fire. But more so in that year, it was the year that the marriages of 3 of her children had broken down. And the headlines splashed across the TV screens. Prince Andrew and Fergie separate. Princess Anne's divorced from her husband. And Charles and Diana's affairs all come to light. Now you can imagine any mother saddened by those events. But how much more all of these things splashed over the national newspaper. And the Queen, in her response around that time, was to express real gratitude, actually, for the support and prayers of others. November 1992, at the end of that year, at the Guildhall in the City of London, she said this, she said, "You, my Lord Mayor, and all those whose prayers, fervent I hope, but not too frequent, have sustained me through all these years. They are friends indeed." It's interesting, isn't it? In this secular age, it's surprising to hear an international figure, not a member of the clergy, but talking of prayer in the middle of a major public speech. She did not have to do so, she chose to do so. It's why when times were tough and are tough, the knowledge that others are praying for you on your behalf is wonderful to hear. 2013, she put it this way: "For Christians, as for all people of faith, reflection, meditation and prayer help us to renew ourselves in God's love as we strive daily to become better people. There is no one beyond its reach." She knows prayer is talking and listening to God to give you perspective and strength in your everyday, ordinary lives, particularly in the midst of adversity. Prayer leads to that renewed sense of God's love and care for you. And on the day of Princess Diana's death, and the family were obviously grieving, she took 2 of her grandsons with her to the local church in Balmoral. She was criticised by some for doing so. But in times of pressure and of tragic loss and of death, if you're a believer in a living God, it is precisely to him and to fellow believers that you turn. It's there you turn for your strength, for your comfort, for your perspective, and also for prayer. I don't know how many of you have seen the King's Speech film of Queen Elizabeth's father, King George VI. Some of you may have heard the words read out live on the radio in 1939. And the words were particularly as their country was entering into a war with Germany. And in the midst of adversity and war and facing unknown personal losses, what should be said to the nation at that time? And in Buckingham Palace, the Queen, well, wasn't the Queen then, she was 13 before her father spoke. She handed her father a poem by Minnie Louise Haskins, who thought it might be helpful at this time. And those words were indeed used by her father, which strengthened and stirred the nation. These are those words which he read out and said, "I said to the man who stood at the gate of the year, 'Give me a light that I may tread safely into the unknown.' And he replied, 'Go out into the darkness and put your hand into the hand of God. That shall be to you better than light and safer than a known way.'" She's known God's support and strength through adversity, and we too can learn from that when we face things in our lives. And let me finish with this, that the Queen's held on to persistence and finishing well. She's finished well, not quite yet, she's still in the saddle, as someone put it over the weekend. In 1952, the Archbishop of Canterbury told the Queen Elizabeth she was, God called, to exert a spiritual power and lead her subjects by her personal example. And as we look back over her 70 years of reign, one of the most remarkable things has been her consistency of character all the way through those years. Because despite an unprecedented media scrutiny on her life and what she does and her character, there is not one whiff of scandal about the Queen. She's adapted to the changes around her, the technology and the culture, but all through that she's preserved her dignity. And the reality is Elizabeth II consistently and winsomely has publicly honoured the God that she serves. It's been an extraordinary example of joyful, persevering, life-affirming and generous-hearted service of others. 6 months before her coronation, Elizabeth asked her subjects, she said, I think you started with this, Anne, "Pray that God may give me wisdom and strength to carry out the solemn promises I shall be making, and that I may faithfully serve him and you all the days of my life." And God, it is clear, has answered those prayers. So we thank God for this Queen. And I believe that when she does get to stand before God, he would say, "Well done, good and faithful servant." So we thank her for her willingness to rise up and serve. And we're going to finish our time together by listening to a song which has been written on that title, Rise Up and Serve, particularly for this occasion as we celebrate the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. So let's finish by listening and watching this.